Tony didn't even have time to react. The milkshake splattered across the tile. The laughter echoed through the diner. And Chloe Sterling, 17, rich, vicious, spat on her face. The room went dead silent. Tony stood frozen, humiliation crawling down her spine while 10 phones rose to capture her shame. And from the shadowed corner booth, a man in a charcoal suit stood up. No one spoke. No one dared breathe because everyone at Neon Night's diner knew exactly who he was. Sun Sang-wook, the Korean Mafia boss. Then, turning to the girl who just destroyed her, he said quietly, "Wipe her face and apologize." Bell above the diner door chimed, that familiar tinny sound that usually disappeared into the background noise of Neon Night's diner. The air was thick with the smell of burnt coffee, frying bacon, and the sickly sweet scent of syrup hardening on laminate tables. For Tony Green, 26, it was just another Friday night, another grueling shift, another stack of tips that would barely keep her sister in school. She dried her hands on her apron and forced a smile at the elderly couple in booth 5. The smile was automatic now. It had been for years. The diner was the kind of place time forgot. Crimson vinyl booths patched with duct tape, black and white checkered floors worn smooth by decades of footsteps, a vintage jukebox that hadn't played a song since 2019, and a flickering neon sign in the window promising, "Open all night." It was a haven for exhausted rideshare drivers, insomniacs nursing cold coffee, and broken souls with nowhere to go when the city went dark. Tony belonged here, because she'd never been given the chance to belong anywhere else. At the far end, in the corner booth where the overhead lights barely reached, sat 4 men. They came every Friday without fail. Silent, well-dressed in tailored suits that seemed out of place against the greasy atmosphere. They never made small talk, never caused trouble, never ordered more than coffee and sometimes a slice of pie. They just observed. Tony brought their drinks, refilled them before they asked, and pretended she couldn't feel the weight of their attention like electricity against her skin. That night, everything shattered. The door swung open again, and the entire atmosphere shifted. 5 teenagers burst in like they owned the place. Designer bags, luxury watches catching the neon light, phones already out and recording. Their laughter was deliberate, performed, meant to announce their presence. Leading them was Chloe Sterling, 17, daughter of real estate mogul Richard Sterling, whose face smiled from half the development billboards across the city. Everyone knew the Sterlings. They didn't eat at places like Neon Nights. Tony's chest tightened. This meant trouble. They claimed the booth right by the window, positioning themselves where they'd be most visible. Chloe snapped her fingers, and Tony walked over, order pad ready, jaw set. "What can I get you tonight?" Tony asked, keeping her voice professional. Chloe's smile was razor-sharp. 5 strawberry shakes and a bottle of vodka. Tony paused. "I'm sorry, miss, we can't serve alcohol to minors." Chloe cocked her head, blonde hair swishing. "Do I look like a minor to you?" Her friend snickered. One boy was already filming. "Come on, Chloe, she's just following the rules," he said weakly. Chloe waved him off. "Listen, waitress," she said, stretching the word like it was an insult. "When my father's investment parties spend more in an hour than this roach motel makes in a month, you'll fetch what I tell you to." Tony kept her voice even. "It's against the law. I'd lose my job." "Oh, sweetheart," Chloe said, leaning back with mock pity. "You already lost your future. Look around." She gestured at the peeling wallpaper, the cracked countertops, the grease stains that wouldn't come out. "Broken furniture, food that tastes like cardboard, and you—" Her eyes swept over Tony's stained uniform with disgust. "You reek of desperation and minimum wage." The laughter hit like physical blows. Tony pressed her lips together. "I'll get those milkshakes." She turned toward the counter, fire burning behind her eyes. Just walk away, she told herself. Don't give them the satisfaction. She'd survived worse. She'd survive this. Then she heard it, a wet, violent sound. Something warm struck her cheek. Thick, disgusting. The taste of spit and strawberry syrup filled her mouth before her brain could process what had happened. Chloe Sterling had spit on her. Time stopped. Every conversation died mid-sentence. The sizzle of the griddle, the hum of the ancient refrigerator, even the buzz of the neon sign seemed to fade. Tony stood paralyzed, eyes wide, one shaking hand pressed to her face. Chloe's phone camera was aimed directly at her. "Smile for your viral moment, babe," Chloe cooed. "Maybe someone will finally see you exist." More laughter, but quieter now, uncertain. People at other tables shifted in their seats, staring hard at their plates. No one intervened. No one spoke. Tony felt her throat close. The 3:00 a.m. rush at Neon Night's diner was less of a rush and more of a slow crawl through purgatory. Tony Green moved between tables with the kind of efficiency that came from muscle memory, her feet aching in shoes held together by super glue and prayers. The overnight crowd was always the same. Truck drivers nursing their third cup of burnt coffee, a handful of nurses from County General still in their scrubs, and the occasional drunk couple stumbling in for hash browns they'd regret in 4 hours. Tony refilled coffee without being asked, dropped checks without making eye contact, and collected tips that amounted to loose change and the occasional crumpled $5 bill. Her younger sister Destiny's tuition payment was due in 6 days. She was $43 short, which meant picking up another double shift this weekend, which meant less sleep, which meant her hands shook a little more each time she carried a tray. "More coffee, hun?" she asked the trucker in booth 7, already pouring before he grunted his approval. He didn't look up from his phone. None of them ever really looked at her. That was the trick to surviving this job. You had to become invisible. A vessel for coffee and pancakes, a smile with no person attached. The diner itself seemed to hum with exhaustion. The overhead fluorescents flickered in a rhythm Tony had long stopped noticing. The jukebox in the corner had been broken for 3 years, its glass face reflecting the neon glow from the street outside. The vinyl booths were patched with duct tape in 6 different colors, a patchwork history of quick fixes that never quite held. The black-and-white checkered floor was supposed to look retro chic, but mostly it just looked tired. Tony wiped down the counter for the 4th time that hour, her rag coming away gray with grease that never fully disappeared no matter how hard she scrubbed. Behind her, the cook, a 50-something man named Roy who rarely spoke, flipped eggs with mechanical precision. The sizzle and pop of the griddle provided a constant soundtrack, along with the intermittent hiss of the ancient coffee maker. She glanced at the clock. 3:47 a.m. Another 5 hours until her shift ended. Another 5 hours of forcing her spine straight, her smile pleasant, her voice bright with a cheer she hadn't genuinely felt in years. That's when she felt it again. That prickling sensation at the back of her neck, the awareness of being watched. Her eyes drifted to the corner booth, the one tucked into the shadows where the overhead lights didn't quite reach. 4 men sat there, as they did every Friday night. They'd arrived around midnight without fanfare, sliding into their usual spot with a kind of quiet authority that made the air feel heavier. They wore suits, not the cheap polyester kind, but tailored pieces in charcoal and navy that probably cost more than Tony made in 3 months. Their faces were impassive, professional, the kind of blank expression that suggested they'd seen things that would make ordinary people flinch. And at the center of them, in the seat facing the entire diner, sat Sun Sangwook. Tony had learned his name by accident 6 months ago, overhearing 2 police officers whispering urgently at the counter before they'd thrown down their money and left without finishing their meal. Since then, she'd made it a point not to know anything else. In a neighborhood like this, ignorance was survival. But she couldn't ignore him, not when his presence filled the room like a low-frequency hum you felt in your chest rather than heard. He was younger than she'd expected the first time she'd seen him, maybe early 30s, with sharp features and eyes so dark they looked black in the dim light. His hair was styled back from his face, and there was a stillness to him that felt predatory. Like he was always 1 second away from movement, but chose to remain perfectly motionless. He never ordered much. Black coffee, occasionally a slice of pie he barely touched, But his eyes tracked everything. The drunk couple arguing in booth 3, the nurse scrolling through her phone with dead eyes, the trucker palming pills into his coffee when he thought no one was looking. And Tony, always Tony. She felt his gaze now as she moved through her section, refilling water glasses and clearing plates. It wasn't lecherous or aggressive. It was something else. Something that felt like assessment. Like he was taking her apart piece by piece, cataloging every worn seam in her uniform, every forced smile, every moment her hands trembled from exhaustion. It should have frightened her. Part of her knew she should ask Roy to switch her section, should avoid the corner booth entirely. But there was something almost comforting about being seen, even if the person doing the seeing was dangerous. For 3 years, Tony had been invisible, to customers, to her manager, to the city itself. She was furniture. She was a function. But when Sun Sang-wook looked at her, she existed. "Table 12 needs ketchup," Roy called from the kitchen, breaking her trance. Tony grabbed a bottle from the supply shelf and delivered it to a bleary-eyed college student who mumbled thanks without looking up from his laptop. She circled back to the coffee station, her routine so ingrained she could do it in her sleep. Sometimes she wondered if she was doing it in her sleep. The bell above the door chimed. A couple stumbled in, giggling, the woman's heels clicking unevenly on the checkered floor. Tony seated them in booth 9, handed them menus they wouldn't read, and took their order for mozzarella sticks and 2 Cokes. The woman's lipstick was smeared. The man had his hand too far up her thigh. Tony pretended not to notice. When she turned back toward the coffee station, she had to pass the corner booth. She always tried to time it so she could refill their coffee without lingering, without making eye contact. But tonight, as she approached with the pot, Sun Sang-wook's voice stopped her. "Tony." It was the first time he'd ever spoken her name. His voice was quiet, smooth, with the faintest trace of an accent she couldn't quite place. Not a question, not a command. Just her name, spoken like he'd been saying it to himself for months and was finally testing how it sounded aloud. She froze, the coffee pot suddenly weighing 1,000 pounds in her hand. "Yes, sir." He didn't look at her. His eyes remained fixed on the window, watching the street outside where a homeless man was rearranging cardboard boxes under a broken streetlight. "You work too hard." It wasn't what she expected. Tony's throat went dry. "Just doing my job." "6 shifts this week," he continued, still not looking at her. "2 doubles. You take the bus home because your car broke down 3 weeks ago. You haven't eaten anything tonight except the fries that customer left in booth 4. Her blood went cold. He'd been watching, really watching. Not just casual observation, he knew her schedule, her habits, the details of her life she thought were invisible. "I'm fine," she said, her voice coming out smaller than she intended. "You're exhausted." One of his men shifted slightly, and Tony caught a glimpse of something holstered under his jacket. Her pulse kicked up. She should walk away. She should smile and nod and retreat to the safety of the kitchen. But her feet wouldn't move. "Coffee," she managed, lifting the pot slightly. Finally, Sun Sang-wook's eyes slid to hers. They were fathomless, unreadable, and for a moment Tony felt like she was falling. "Please." She refilled his cup with shaking hands, concentrating on not spilling. The other 3 men at the table didn't acknowledge her existence. They were statues, decorative and deadly. "Thank you, Tony," Sun Sang-wook said as she turned to leave. She nodded and forced herself to walk, not run, back to the counter. Her heart was hammering against her ribs. Roy gave her a look from the kitchen, a warning look that said stay away from that table. But Tony was already replaying the conversation in her mind, trying to understand what had just happened. The rest of the early morning crawled by in a blur of orders and refills and the mechanical dance of service work. But Tony couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted. The corner booth remained occupied, quiet, watchful. And every time she glanced that direction, Sun Sang-wook was looking at her. Not at the diner, not at the door, at her. By the time the sky started to lighten outside, turning the neon glow of the street harsh and unflattering, Tony's exhaustion had transformed into something else. A kind of hyper-awareness. A feeling that tonight had been a prelude to something she didn't understand yet. When the clock finally hit 4:30 a.m. and the morning shift waitress shuffled in, Tony untied her apron with numb fingers. She counted her tips in the back room, $63, enough to make the tuition payment with a few dollars to spare, and pulled on her jacket. The corner booth was empty now. The men had left sometime in the last 20 minutes, silent as shadows. But on the table, next to a $50 bill folded under the empty coffee cup, was a business card. Cream-colored, expensive paper. No name, just a phone number embossed in black ink. Tony stared at it for a long moment, her exhausted brain struggling to process what it meant. Then she slipped it into her pocket, turned off the lights in her section, and walked out into the cold morning air, feeling like she'd just crossed a line she couldn't uncross. Tony didn't work Fridays normally, but Roy had called Thursday afternoon with that particular desperation in his voice that meant someone had quit without notice. Again. So here she was, back in the uniform she'd just washed, her feet still aching from yesterday's double, pulling another overnight shift because $43 had turned into $68 after her sister texted about needing new textbooks. The Friday night crowd was different from the usual 3:00 a.m. stragglers. Younger, louder, more reckless. Groups of 20-somethings who'd been bar-hopping stumbled in around midnight, ordering cheese fries they'd pick at while scrolling through their phones. Tony moved through her section with practiced efficiency, ignoring the occasional slurred pickup line, the grabby hands she'd learned to dodge, the comments about her body that men thought she couldn't hear. Around 1 a.m, the corner booth filled again. The same 4 men, the same expensive suits, the same unsettling quiet. Sun Sangwook took his usual seat facing the room, and Tony felt that familiar prickle of awareness crawl up her spine. She brought coffee without being asked, set it down without lingering, and retreated before he could say her name again. The business card was still in her jacket pocket. She'd looked at it approximately 40 times since yesterday, her thumb tracing the embossed numbers, but she hadn't called. What would she even say? And more importantly, what did a man like him want with someone like her? The bell above the door chimed at 1:47 a.m., and the temperature in the diner seemed to drop 10 degrees. Tony looked up from wiping down table 8 and felt her stomach clench. 5 teenagers poured through the entrance like they were stepping onto a yacht, not into a grease-stained diner that smelled like burnt coffee and industrial cleaner. Designer everything. Jackets that cost more than Tony's monthly rent, shoes that had never seen a scuff mark, phones in custom cases that probably cost more than her bus fare for a year. At the front of the pack was a girl who moved like she'd never been told no in her entire life. Blonde hair in perfect waves, makeup that looked professionally applied, a cropped jacket that showed off her flat stomach, and the diamond belly button ring that caught the overhead lights. She was laughing at something on her phone, holding it up for her friends to see, and the sound was sharp and performative. Chloe Sterling. Tony recognized her from the billboards, the society page of the local paper that someone had left on table 4 last week. Daddy's little princess, 17 years old and already infamous for the kind of behavior that money made disappear. They chose the booth by the window, of course they did, where everyone could see them, where passing cars would catch glimpses of their carefully curated lives. Tony took a breath, squared her shoulders, and approached with her order pad and her customer service smile. "Welcome to Neon Nights. What can I get started for you tonight?" Chloe didn't look up from her phone. One of the boys' dark hair, varsity jacket, the kind of handsome that knew it, glanced at Tony with bored eyes. "We're still deciding." "No problem. I'll give you a few minutes." "Actually," Chloe said, finally lifting her gaze, "we know what we want." She looked Tony up and down with an expression somewhere between amusement and disgust. 5 strawberry milkshakes, extra thick, and a bottle of Grey Goose. The table went quiet, waiting. Tony's customer service smile stayed frozen on her face. I can absolutely get those milkshakes for you, but I'm afraid we can't serve alcohol to anyone under 21. Chloe's perfectly shaped eyebrows rose. Excuse me. It's state law, miss. I'd lose my license to serve, and the diner could lose its liquor license. One of the other girls, red hair, bored expression, leaned forward. Do you know who she is? Tony kept her voice level. I do, and I'd be happy to get you some sodas or coffee or... Do I look like someone who drinks soda from a place like this? Chloe's voice had gone cold, and suddenly all 5 of them were staring at Tony with identical expressions of contempt. Let me explain something to you, because clearly you're not getting it. My father is Richard Sterling. Sterling Development. Sterling Properties. The man who probably owns the building this sad little shack is rotting in. I understand, but... Do you? Chloe leaned back in the booth, spreading her arms along the back of the vinyl seat like she owned it. Because from where I'm sitting, you're a waitress in a diner that smells like a truck stop bathroom, and I'm the daughter of a man who could buy this entire block and turn it into a parking lot by Monday morning. The boy in the varsity jacket shifted uncomfortably. Chloe, come on, let's just... Shut up, Tyler. Chloe didn't even look at him. Her eyes stayed locked on Tony. You know what I think? I think you're jealous. I think you look at girls like me and you hate us because we have everything you'll never have. Money, looks, a future that doesn't involve scrubbing other people's filth off cracked plates. Tony's hands tightened on her order pad. Heat crawled up her neck. I'll get your milkshakes. She turned to walk away, determined not to let this spoiled child see her rattled. But Chloe's voice cut through the diner loud enough for every table to hear. Oh my God, did you guys see that? She's so mad she's shaking. Laughter erupted from the booth. Look at her uniform. Is that a stain? From what 1997? Tony kept walking. Just get to the counter. Just make it to the kitchen. Roy was watching from the pass-through window, his expression dark but helpless. What was he going to do? Throw out the daughter of the man who probably really did own the building. Behind her, she heard the scrape of vinyl, the rustle of expensive fabric, footsteps on the checkered floor. Tony reached the counter and picked up her order pad to mark down 5 milkshakes, but her hands were trembling now, the pen shaking in her grip. Hey, waitress. Chloe's voice was right behind her. I wasn't done talking to you. Tony turned slowly. Chloe had followed her to the counter, phone in hand, held up at eye level. Recording. The red dot in the corner of the screen like a tiny accusation. Behind Chloe, her friends had their phones out too, a firing squad of cameras all pointed at Tony's humiliation. You know what I think, Chloe said, her voice sickeningly sweet. I think poor people need to learn their place. You're here to serve me, not to lecture me about laws that don't apply to people who actually matter. Miss Sterling, I'm just trying to do my job. Your job, Chloe's laugh was cruel. Your job is to be grateful that people like me even walk through that door. Without us, what is this place? A roach motel for truckers and drug addicts. She gestured around the diner, making sure her phone camera caught every peeling corner, every stained booth. Look at this dump. The vinyl is torn, the floor is sticky. And you? Her eyes raked over Tony's uniform again. You smell like grease and sadness. The other diners had gone quiet. Every eye in the place was on them now, but no one moved to intervene. The college student in the corner stared at his laptop screen harder. The elderly couple in booth 5 suddenly found their coffee fascinating. Even the drunk at the counter swiveled away, pretending he couldn't hear. Tony felt her throat tighten. I'll get your order. No, Chloe stepped closer, close enough that Tony could smell her expensive perfume, something floral and sharp. First, you're going to apologize for being rude to me. I wasn't rude. I just explained. You embarrassed me in front of my friends. You made me feel unwelcome. That's discrimination, you know. Chloe's smile was vicious. I could have you fired for that. I could call my father right now and have this entire place shut down by morning. Tyler had come up behind Chloe, looking uncomfortable. Chloe, seriously, let's just go somewhere else. Why? So she can think she won? Chloe turned to her friends, making sure they were all still recording. This is what I'm talking about. This is the problem with people like her. They think that just because they're poor and pathetic, we're supposed to feel sorry for them, like their miserable little lives are our responsibility. Something in Tony snapped. Just a little, just enough. You need to go back to your table or leave. The diner went dead silent. Even Roy had stopped moving in the kitchen. Chloe's expression transformed from cruel amusement to genuine outrage. What did you just say to me? I asked you to return to your table or leave the premises. Tony's voice was shaking, but she held her ground. You're disrupting other customers. I'm disrupting. Chloe's laugh was shrill now, disbelieving. Do you have any idea what you just did? Do you have any concept of how badly you just screwed up? She turned to her friends, making sure every camera caught her next words. Did you all hear that? She just threatened me. This aggressive waitress just told me to leave a public establishment. That's assault. That's harassment. That's not, Tony started. But Chloe was on a roll now, performing for an audience of millions who would eventually see this video. You know what? I was trying to be nice. I was trying to give this sad place my business, bring my friends here, maybe leave a good review. But clearly you don't want customers who have actual money. You'd rather serve degenerates and criminals. Her eyes flicked to the corner booth, and something dangerous flashed across her face. Oh my God, is that why you're being such a bitch? Do you have a thing for one of those Mafia guys back there? Are you their little pet? Tony's blood went cold. Don't look, don't react, don't give her anything else to use. But Chloe had already moved on, riding the high of her performance. This is actually perfect. This is exactly the kind of content people need to see. The real face of service workers, aggressive, entitled, acting like they're doing us a favor by bringing us food. She pulled a milkshake from her friend's hand. One of them must have ordered from Roy directly, and before Tony could process what was happening, Chloe upended it. The thick pink liquid splashed across the counter, across Tony's uniform, cold and sticky and humiliating. The glass hit the floor and shattered, spraying more shake across Tony's shoes, the checkerboard tile everywhere. The cameras caught it all. 10 different angles of Tony standing there, soaked and stunned, while Chloe Sterling laughed. And then Chloe stepped forward, close enough that Tony could see the perfect edges of her lip liner, the cold calculation in her eyes. Smile for the camera, sweetheart, she whispered. Maybe someone will finally notice you exist. And she spit, directly in Tony's face. You're absolutely right. Let me revise the ending of Chapter 3 to include the CTA as specified in the outline. The world had narrowed to a single point of humiliation. Tony stood frozen, the warmth of saliva sliding down her cheek, mixing with the cold strawberry shake soaking through her uniform. The smell of it, artificial sweetness and something worse, something human and degrading, filled her nose. Her vision blurred at the edges, and for a moment she thought she might faint. Just collapse right there on the sticky checkerboard floor while 10 phones recorded her complete destruction. Chloe's laughter was the only sound, high and sharp and triumphant. Then the air changed. It wasn't a sound, not at first. It was a feeling, like the pressure drop before a storm, like the moment before lightning strikes when every hair on your body stands up in warning. The temperature in the diner seemed to plummet. The fluorescent lights overhead flickered once, twice, casting strange shadows across the red vinyl booths. And Sun Sang-wook stood up. The movement was unhurried, almost casual, but it silenced every voice in the diner instantly. He rose from the corner booth like a king leaving his throne. And the 3 men with him shifted in their seats, hands moving subtly to their jackets. They didn't stand, but their stillness became predatory, coiled. Sang-wook moved with the kind of grace that didn't belong in a place like Neon Nights. Each step was measured, deliberate, his expensive shoes making no sound on the worn floor. He was tall, taller than Tony had realized from seeing him seated, and the charcoal suit he wore fit him like a second skin, clearly custom-made, clearly worth more than everything in this diner combined. But it was his face that made Chloe's laughter die in her throat. He wasn't angry. Anger would have been better, more human, more understandable. Instead, his expression was perfectly blank, carved from ice, and his eyes, those impossibly dark eyes, held something ancient and terrible. He looked at Chloe Sterling the way a scientist might look at a specimen, curious, clinical, already deciding how to dissect it. Chloe took a step back, her phone wavering in her hand. We were just. Sangwook walked past her like she didn't exist. He moved directly to Tony, who was still standing there dripping and shaking, one hand pressed to her face where the spit had landed. He stopped close enough that she could smell his cologne, something dark and expensive, cedar and smoke, and for a terrible moment Tony thought she might actually cry. "Don't," he said quietly, so quietly that only she could hear. "Don't give them that." His hand moved to his jacket pocket, and when it emerged, he was holding a handkerchief. Crisp white linen, probably silk blend, monogrammed in the corner with initials Tony couldn't make out in her current state. He lifted it toward her face, and she flinched reflexively. "May I?" His voice was still quiet, but there was something underneath it now. A barely restrained fury that made Tony's breath catch. She nodded, not trusting her voice. Sangwook's touch was impossibly gentle. He wiped her cheek with careful precision, his movements methodical, almost tender. Up close, Tony could see the details she'd missed from across the diner, the faint scar near his left temple, the tattoo peeking out from under his collar, the way his jaw clenched and unclenched as he cleaned her face. His hands didn't shake. They were steady as a surgeon's. "Close your eyes," he said, and when she obeyed, he wiped the last of the humiliation from her skin. Behind them, Chloe had found her voice again, emboldened by her friends and the cameras still recording. "Excuse me, who the hell do you think you?" Sangwook didn't turn around. He simply raised one hand, a small gesture, barely noticeable, and the entire diner seemed to hold its breath. One of his men from the corner booth stood up, and Tyler grabbed Chloe's arm, his face pale. "Chloe, shut up now." "Don't tell me to shut up, this is." "That's son Sangwook." Tyler's voice cracked on the name. "That's Jesus Christ, Chloe, that's him." Recognition flickered across Chloe's face, followed immediately by fear. Real fear, the kind money couldn't buy or sell. Her phone dipped slightly. The red-haired girl behind her whispered something urgent, tugging on Chloe's jacket. Sangwook finally turned. He tucked the soiled handkerchief back into his pocket. He'd keep it, Tony realized with a strange jolt. He'd keep the evidence, and looked at Chloe Sterling with the full weight of his attention. "Your name," he said, not a question. Chloe's mouth opened and closed. She looked to her friends for support, but they'd all taken steps back, phones lowering. Tyler had gone completely white. "I don't have to tell you anything, my father." "Richard Sterling." Sangwook said the name like he was reading an obituary. "Sterling Development, 12 properties across the city, 3 of them built on land seized through eminent domain abuse, 2 ongoing lawsuits from displaced families, 46 code violations swept under the table through strategic donations to the building inspector's campaign fund." He tilted his head slightly. "Should I continue?" The color drained from Chloe's face. "How do you?" "Your father's business practices are well documented. I make it my responsibility to know who operates in my city and how." Sangwook's voice remained perfectly level, conversational almost, which somehow made it more terrifying. "And you, Chloe Sterling, 17 years old, 3 DUIs expunged from your record, 1 assault charge settled out of court, a pattern of behavior your father's money has repeatedly erased." He took a step toward her, and Chloe scrambled backward, nearly tripping over her own expensive shoes. "Until tonight," Sangwook continued, Tonight, you made a mistake. You hurt someone under my protection. Tony's head snapped toward him. Protection? They'd spoken exactly once. He'd left a business card she hadn't called. When had she become his to protect? But Sangwook wasn't looking at her. His gaze stayed locked on Chloe, who was shaking now, her carefully applied makeup starting to run as tears leaked from the corners of her eyes. I didn't know. We were just messing around. You spit on her. Each word fell like a hammer. You humiliated her, degraded her, recorded it for your entertainment. His eyes flicked to the phones still clutched in their hands. All of you. The red-haired girl dropped her phone like it had burned her. It clattered on the floor, screen cracking. Another boy fumbled with his device, frantically swiping, probably deleting the video. Probably too late. I want you to apologize, Sangwook said. Chloe blinked, confused. What? You heard me. Apologize to her, on your knees. The diner was so quiet Tony could hear the hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen, the buzz of the neon sign outside, the ragged sound of Chloe's breathing. I'm not, you can't make me, my father will. Sangwook moved so fast it didn't register at first. One moment he was standing several feet away, the next he was close enough to Chloe that she flinched violently backward, hitting the booth behind her. He didn't touch her. Didn't need to. His proximity alone was a threat. Your father, he said softly, is a real estate developer who plays at power. I own the people he pays to look the other way. I know where his money comes from, where his bodies are buried, literally and figuratively. If I wanted to, I could have him in handcuffs by morning. So when I tell you to apologize, you apologize. Chloe was crying openly now, mascara tracking down her cheeks, her carefully curated image disintegrating in real time. Her friends had abandoned her, clustering by the door, ready to bolt. Tyler looked like he might throw up. I'm sorry, Chloe whispered. Louder, and on your knees. Please, Now. The command in that single word was absolute. Chloe's legs seemed to give out, and she collapsed onto the sticky diner floor, her designer jeans pressing into old coffee stains and tracked in grime. She looked up at Tony with red, swollen eyes. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I didn't mean. I was being stupid and cruel, and I'm sorry. Tony couldn't move, couldn't speak. This moment felt surreal, like she'd slipped into some alternate reality where physics worked differently and the powerful actually faced consequences. Sangwook had done this. With nothing but his presence and his words, he'd brought Chloe Sterling to her knees on a filthy diner floor. Look at her when you apologize, Sangwook said, and mean it. Chloe's gaze met Tony's, and for the first time there was genuine remorse there. Or maybe just terror. Tony couldn't tell the difference anymore. I'm sorry for what I did. I'm sorry for humiliating you. You didn't deserve it, none of it. The words tumbled out in a rush, desperate and raw. Please, I'm sorry. Sangwook looked at Tony. Is this acceptable? Was it? Tony's mind was spinning. Part of her wanted to savor this, wanted to watch Chloe grovel and beg and finally understand what it felt like to be powerless. But mostly she just felt tired, so incredibly tired. Yes, she said, her voice hoarse. Sangwook nodded once. He looked down at Chloe. Get up, delete every video, all of you. He raised his voice slightly, addressing the entire diner. If I find footage of tonight's incident online, I will know who posted it, and I will respond accordingly. Is that understood? A murmur of agreement rippled through the diner. Phones disappeared into pockets. Eyes returned to plates. The normal sounds of the restaurant slowly returned, the hiss of the griddle, the gurgle of the coffee maker. Chloe Sterling thought her money made her untouchable, a goddess among mortals who could humiliate anyone without consequences. But tonight, she learned that real power doesn't come from a trust fund. If you think bullies like Chloe deserve a reality check, hit that like button to stand with Tony. Because everyone deserves respect, no matter what they do for a living. Chloe stumbled to her feet, supported by Tyler. who looked at Sangwook with undisguised terror. "Can we go, please?" "You can go." Sangwook stepped aside, and the 5 teenagers bolted for the door like prisoners granted pardon. The bell above the entrance chimed frantically as they spilled out into the night, their voices rising in panicked conversation the moment they hit the sidewalk. And then it was just Tony and Sangwook, standing in a puddle of spilled milkshake and broken glass, while the rest of the diner pretended very hard not to watch them. Sangwook turned to her, and his expression softened almost imperceptibly. "Are you hurt?" "No, Tony's voice broke. "Why did you do that?" "Because no one else would." He said it simply, like it was obvious. "And because you shouldn't have to endure that kind of cruelty in silence." "You didn't have to. I'm nobody to you." Something flickered across his face. "You're not nobody." The weight of those words hung in the air between them, heavy with implications Tony wasn't ready to unpack. Roy had emerged from the kitchen, a mop in hand, his expression carefully neutral. "I'll clean up," he said. "Tony, why don't you take your break?" Tony looked down at herself, uniform soaked, shoes sticky, hair probably a disaster. "I should change." "I'll wait," Sangwook said. "We should talk." It wasn't quite a request. Tony nodded numbly and headed toward the back room, her legs unsteady. Behind her, she heard Sangwook return to his booth, heard the quiet murmur of his men's voices. Everything had changed. She just didn't understand how yet. Tony's shift ended at 6:00 a.m., when the morning light turned the neon sign outside into a pale, sickly glow. She'd changed into her street clothes, jeans with a hole in the knee, a hoodie that had seen better years, sneakers held together with determination, and stuffed her ruined uniform into her backpack. Roy had told her not to worry about it, that he'd comp the replacement, but Tony knew what that meant. He'd take it out of her next paycheck in small increments. She was supposed to pretend not to notice. The conversation with Sangwook after the incident had been brief and strange. He'd asked if she was okay, really okay, not just physically. She'd nodded because what else could she do? Then he'd told her to be careful, that people like the Sterlings didn't accept humiliation gracefully, that they'd look for ways to retaliate. Tony had wanted to ask why he cared, why he'd intervened, what he wanted from her. But the questions had stuck in her throat, and he'd left with his men before she found the courage to speak them aloud. Now she stood outside the diner's back entrance, the alley lit by a single flickering bulb that barely pushed back the shadows. The morning air was cold enough to see her breath, and somewhere in the distance, a garbage truck groaned through its mechanical routine. She pulled her phone from her pocket, 11% battery, 3 missed texts from Destiny asking about money for a school trip, and started walking toward the bus stop 6 blocks away. The alley emptied onto a side street that ran parallel to the main drag. At this hour, it was deserted except for the occasional early morning jogger or delivery truck. Tony kept her head down, her hands shoved into her hoodie pocket, moving with the particular wariness of someone who'd learned that being invisible was a survival skill. She made it 2 blocks before she realized she was being followed. It wasn't obvious at first, just a feeling, that prickling awareness between her shoulder blades that made her glance back over her shoulder. A black sedan was crawling along the curb about half a block behind her, moving too slowly to be normal traffic. The windows were tinted dark enough that she couldn't see who was inside. Tony's pulse kicked up. She walked faster, her sneakers slapping against the pavement. The bus stop was 4 blocks away, 4 blocks that suddenly felt like 4 miles. The sedan kept pace with her, never getting closer but never falling back. When she turned the corner, it turned. When she crossed the street, it followed. Her heart was hammering now, adrenaline flooding her system, every instinct screaming at her to run. But running would prove she was scared. Running would make her pray. 3 blocks from the bus stop, the sedan pulled ahead of her and stopped abruptly, angled to block the sidewalk. Both front doors opened simultaneously, and 2 men stepped out. They wore suits, Not as expensive as Sangwook's, but professional enough to suggest they weren't street thugs. One was older, maybe 50, with gray at his temples and the kind of face that had forgotten how to smile. The other was younger, built like he spent significant time in a gym, with cold eyes and a jaw that looked like it could crack walnuts. Tony stopped walking. Her brain was working frantically, calculating distances, exits, options. The alley to her left was a dead end. The street to her right was empty. Behind her was the way she'd come, but the sedan blocked any path forward. Tony Green. The older man's voice was smooth, professionally neutral, like he was asking for directions, not cornering a woman in a deserted street at dawn. She didn't answer. Her hand tightened around her phone in her pocket. "We just want to talk," he continued, taking a step closer. "About what happened tonight at the diner." "I don't know what you're talking about." Her voice came out steadier than she felt. "Sure you do." The younger man smiled, and it was the kind of smile that made Tony's stomach drop. "You embarrassed Chloe Sterling, made her apologize in front of everyone. That wasn't very smart." "She spit on me. I didn't do anything." "That's not how Mr. Sterling sees it." The older man pulled something from his inside jacket pocket, not a weapon, just a phone, and turned the screen toward her. It showed a video, clearly taken from inside the diner, but it had been edited, cleverly edited. It showed Chloe on her knees, crying, while Sangwook loomed over her menacingly. But it didn't show what came before. Didn't show the milkshake, the spit, the humiliation. "This video is going to go viral by noon," the older man said conversationally. "Local waitress and her Mafia boyfriend terrorize innocent teenager. The media is going to have a field day. Your face will be everywhere, attached to words like thug and criminal and accomplice." Tony's blood went cold. "That's not what happened." "Doesn't matter what happened. Matters what people believe happened." He tucked the phone away. "Mr. Sterling is a reasonable man. He's willing to make this go away. All you have to do is sign a statement saying you and your associate threatened his daughter, that you demanded money to keep quiet about alleged safety violations in the diner. Simple extortion narrative. You get charged, you serve maybe 18 months, and when you get out, Mr. Sterling will make sure you're taken care of. Small settlement. Enough to set you up somewhere new. You want me to confess to something I didn't do and go to prison. We want you to face the consequences of your actions." The younger man had moved closer now, close enough that Tony could smell his cologne, something aggressive and woody. "You should have kept your head down, should have taken the humiliation and moved on. But you had to get that gangster involved, had to make it a thing. Now there are consequences." Tony looked between them, her mind racing. They were serious. They were actually serious. The Sterlings were going to frame her for extortion, paint her as a criminal, destroy her life because their spoiled daughter had been forced to apologize. "And if I refuse?" The older man sighed like she'd disappointed him. "Then the video goes live. Your sister Destiny, is it? 16 years old, junior at Marshall High. Her life gets very difficult. Colleges don't look kindly on family connections to organized crime. Scholarship committees even less so. And that's before we start looking into your mother's disability benefits. Lot of paperwork there. Lot of potential. Irregularities." The threat was clear. Sign the confession or they destroy not just Tony, but everyone she loved. "I need time to think." "You have 30 seconds. The younger man checked his watch like he had somewhere else to be. Tony's throat was so tight she could barely breathe. This couldn't be happening. This couldn't be real. She'd spent 3 years keeping her head down, being invisible, surviving. And now because some rich girl had decided to use her for entertainment, her entire life was being torn apart. 20 seconds. Her hand was still in her pocket, wrapped around her phone. She could call someone. But who? The police. The Sterlings probably owned half the department. A lawyer. With what money? Sangwook. She didn't even have his number memorized, just that business card she'd left in her locker at the diner. 10 seconds. Make your choice. Miss Green. The alley behind the two men was still deep in shadow. The the sun not yet high enough to illuminate it. Tony watched those shadows, her mind spinning through impossible options, trying to find a way out that didn't end with her in handcuffs or her sister's future destroyed. And then the shadows moved. It was so subtle she almost missed it. A shift in the darkness, a redistribution of weight. One moment the alley was empty, the next there were figures emerging from it. 4 of them, moving with a kind of coordinated silence that spoke to military training or something worse. The younger man noticed Tony's gaze shift and started to turn, but he was too slow. A hand clamped down on his shoulder, and suddenly he was face first against the sedan, his arm twisted behind his back at an angle that made Tony wince. The older man reached for something in his jacket, but another figure materialized behind him, and whatever he'd been reaching for clattered to the pavement. Sun Sang-wook stepped out of the alley like he'd been conjured from the darkness itself. He was still wearing his suit from the diner, though he'd lost the jacket somewhere. His shirt was crisp white, sleeves rolled to his elbows, revealing the tattoos that covered his forearms, intricate designs Tony couldn't make out in the dim light. He moved with that same unhurried grace, but there was something different about him now. In the diner, he'd been controlled, measured. Now he looked like violence barely contained. "I believe the lady said she needs time to think," he said quietly. The older man had gone very still, his face pale. "Mr. Sun, this is a private conversation." "No." Sang-wook stopped a few feet away, and even without his men restraining the Sterling's fixers, his presence alone was enough to dominate the space. "This is intimidation, extortion, the kind of dirty work rich men pay other people to do so they can sleep at night pretending their hands are clean. We're simply having a discussion about." "You threatened her sister, her mother." Sang-wook's voice dropped even lower, and somehow that made it more terrifying. "You came to her place of work, waited until she was alone and vulnerable, and tried to force her to confess to crimes she didn't commit. That's not a discussion. That's a felony." One of Sang-wook's men, the one restraining the younger fixer, leaned in and whispered something. The man's face went from red to white in an instant. "Here's what's going to happen," Sang-wook continued, his eyes never leaving the older man's face. "You're going to get back in your car. You're going to drive back to Richard Sterling's office. And you're going to tell him that if he or anyone associated with him comes near Tony Green again, I will take it as a personal insult. Do you understand what that means?" The older man swallowed hard. "Mr. Sterling is a powerful. Mr. Sterling builds condos and bribes inspectors. I control 70% of the underground economy in this city. We are not the same." Sang-wook tilted his head slightly. "The video you showed her, I want the original file, all copies, and the name of every person who has access to it. You have until noon." "That's not possible." "Then I suggest you work quickly." Sang-wook nodded to his men, who released the 2 fixers simultaneously. They stumbled away from the sedan, adjusting their suits, trying to recover some dignity. "And tell your employer something for me. Tell him that Tony Green is under my protection now. Officially, which means any move he makes against her is a move against me, and I don't lose." The younger fixer looked like he wanted to say something, but the older man grabbed his arm and practically dragged him back to the sedan. They got in without another word, and the car pulled away faster than was probably legal, tires squealing slightly as it rounded the corner. Silence fell over the street. Tony stood there, her heart still racing, her hands still shaking. Sang-wook's men melted back into the shadows as quietly as they'd appeared, until it was just the 2 of them standing in the growing dawn light. "How did you know?" Tony's voice came out barely above a whisper. "I told you to be careful. Did you think I wouldn't make sure you got home safely?" Sang-wook moved closer, and in the better light she could see the concern in his eyes, barely visible beneath the dangerous exterior. "I had someone watching the diner. When they moved on you, I was notified. You've been having me followed." "Protected, there's a difference." He studied her face, and something in his expression softened. "You're shaking." I'm fine. You're not. He shrugged out of the jacket one of his men handed him from the alley. Apparently they'd been holding it and draped it over her shoulders. It was heavy, expensive, and smelled like cedar and smoke. Let me take you home. I can take the bus. Tony, he said her name like it was important, like it meant something. Please, let me take you home. She should refuse. She should maintain whatever distance she could from a man who clearly lived in a world of violence and power plays. But she was exhausted and terrified, and the jacket was warm, and when he gestured to a different car, this one sleek and black and probably worth more than her entire apartment building, she found herself nodding. As she slid into the leather backseat, one thought kept circling through her mind. Sangwook had said she was under his protection now, officially, which meant this wasn't over, not even close. It was just beginning. The car moved through the city like a shark through dark water, silent, powerful, and entirely out of place in Tony's world of broken buses and cracked sidewalks. She sat in the back seat with Sangwook beside her, his jacket still draped over her shoulders, watching the familiar streets transform into unfamiliar territory. They'd left her neighborhood behind 10 minutes ago, moving steadily upward through the city's economic strata with every mile. The buildings grew taller, cleaner, newer. The streets widened. The people walking the early morning sidewalks wore athleisure that cost more than Tony's monthly rent, carried coffee in cups from places that didn't serve day-old donuts. This was a different city entirely, one that existed in the same geographic space as hers, but might as well have been on another planet. Where are we going? Tony finally asked, breaking the silence that had stretched between them since they'd left the confrontation behind. Somewhere safe, Sangwook replied, his gaze fixed on something outside the window. The Sterlings won't stop with one failed attempt. They'll regroup, strategize, come at you from a different angle. You can't go home right now. I have to, my sister is already being looked after. He turned to face her then, and Tony saw something in his expression she couldn't quite name. Not pity, he didn't seem capable of pity, but something adjacent to it. Understanding, maybe. I sent someone to her school an hour ago. She'll be escorted home safely, and there will be security outside your apartment building. Discreet, but present. Tony's chest tightened. You don't get to make decisions about my family without asking me. You're right, I apologize. The words sounded genuine, which somehow made it worse. But the Sterlings move fast when they feel threatened. By the time I asked your permission, Destiny could have been approached by someone claiming to be a guidance counselor or a scholarship administrator or any number of covers they'd use to gather leverage. The logic was sound, but it didn't make Tony feel less like her life was spiraling out of her control. She'd spent years building careful walls around herself and her sister, keeping them safe through sheer invisibility. Now those walls were crumbling, and Sun Sangwook was standing in the rubble acting like he had the right to rebuild them according to his own blueprint. The car pulled up to a high-rise that made Tony's stomach drop. It was all glass and steel, reaching into the sky like it was trying to escape the earth entirely. A doorman in a uniform that probably cost more than Tony made in a month opened the car door, greeting Sangwook with a respectful nod that suggested this was routine. Mr. Sun, good morning. Sangwook helped Tony out of the car with a hand on her elbow, and she hated how steadying that touch felt. The lobby was marble and gold accents, with a fountain in the center that served no purpose except to announce that the people who lived here had money to waste on decorative water features. A few early risers moved through the space, a woman in yoga pants worth more than a used car, a man in a suit talking urgently into his phone about markets and shares. They took a private elevator. Of course they did. Sangwook pressed his thumb to a biometric scanner, and the doors closed with a whisper-soft hiss. The elevator climbed, and Tony watched the numbers tick higher, 20, 30, 40 floors, until they reached the penthouse level. The doors opened directly into an apartment that made Tony forget how to breathe. Floor-to-ceiling windows wrapped around 2 full walls, offering a view of the city spread out below like a circuit board, all lights and angles and geometric precision. The sun was fully up now, casting golden light across hardwood floors so polished they looked wet. The furniture was minimal but clearly expensive, low-slung sofas in charcoal gray, a dining table that looked carved from a single piece of wood, art on the walls that might have been famous if Tony knew anything about art. But it was the details that caught her attention. The space was immaculate but lived in. A book lay open on the coffee table, its pages marked with a leather bookmark. A pair of reading glasses sat beside it. In the kitchen, visible through an open archway, she could see a coffee maker mid-brew, the scent of expensive beans filling the air. This wasn't a showroom. Someone actually lived here. "Make yourself comfortable," Sang-wook said, moving toward the kitchen. "Are you hungry?" Tony stood frozen in the entryway, suddenly aware of how out of place she looked. Her jeans with the hole in the knee, her ratty hoodie, her discount sneakers, she was a smudge on a pristine canvas. "I should go home." "You can't, not yet." He poured 2 cups of coffee without asking if she wanted any, moving with the efficiency of someone who'd done this 1,000 times. "The Sterlings will be watching your building. They'll have people waiting to see when you return, what state you're in, whether you're alone. Right now, you're safer here." "I don't even know you." Sang-wook paused, cup halfway to his lips. "That's fair." He set the cup down and gestured to the sofa. "Sit, please, let me explain." Tony didn't want to sit. Didn't want to get comfortable in this space that felt like it existed in a different dimension from her reality. But her legs were shaking from adrenaline crash, and the sofa looked impossibly soft, so she lowered herself onto the edge of the cushion, perching like she might need to run at any moment. Sang-wook sat across from her in an armchair, his posture relaxed but his eyes sharp. "I've been watching you for 6 months, every Friday night at the diner, and occasionally on your other shifts." "That's not creepy at all," Tony muttered. "It's not like that." He leaned forward, elbows on his knees. 6 months ago, one of my associates was drunk and belligerent at the diner. He grabbed your wrist when you tried to take his plate, said something crude about your body. Do you remember?" Tony did. She remembered the way her skin had crawled, the way Roy had looked ready to step in but hadn't because the guy was twice his size. She remembered twisting her wrist free and finishing her shift with fingerprint bruises blooming purple under her sleeve. "You didn't cry," Sang-wook continued. "Didn't make a scene. You just pulled away, finished your shift, and went home. The next day, my associate was found beaten so badly he spent a week in the hospital. I did that." He said it matter-of-factly, like he was describing a business transaction. "Because no one who works for me disrespects women. Period." "So you've been stalking me out of what guilt?" "Not guilt, interest." He picked up his coffee, took a sip. "You were different from the others in that diner. The way you moved, the way you handled customers, you were performing invisibility, trying so hard to be nothing, to be background noise. But I saw you, the real you underneath the survival tactics." Tony's throat went tight. "You don't know anything about me." "Don't I?" Sang-wook set down his cup and pulled his phone from his pocket. He tapped the screen a few times, then turned it toward her. "Tony Green, 26 years old. Mother is Linda Green, early-onset Alzheimer's, currently in Brookside Care Facility on the east side. You visit her every Sunday morning before your shift. Your sister Destiny is 16, junior at Marshall High, straight-A student with early acceptance to 3 universities she can't afford to attend. You work 60-hour weeks across 2 jobs, the diner and weekend housekeeping at the Grandview Hotel. You haven't bought new clothes in 8 months. Your car broke down 3 weeks ago, and you sold it for parts rather than repair it because the bus pass was cheaper. You eat 1 meal a day, usually whatever's left over at the diner that Roy lets you take home. You're $43 short on your mother's care facility payment this month." Each fact landed like a physical blow. Tony stared at him, horror and fury warring in her chest. "How do you?" "I make it my business to know things." He pocketed the phone. "Especially about people I care about protecting. You can't just decide to protect someone without asking. I can actually. That's the benefit of the position I hold. He stood, moved to the windows, his silhouette backlit by the morning sun. You think you're invisible, Tony. You think if you keep your head down, work hard enough, sacrifice enough, the world will leave you alone. But that's not how it works. People like the Sterlings, they see your vulnerability as invitation, your silence as permission. And people like you, Tony's voice shook with anger she'd been holding back. What do you see? He turned to face her, and the intensity in his expression made her breath catch. I see someone worth protecting, someone who deserves better than a system designed to break her. I don't need saving. Everyone needs saving sometimes. He moved back toward her, and Tony hated how her body tensed, hated how aware she was of him. 6 months I've watched you fight alone, watched you shoulder burdens that would break most people. You never complain, never ask for help, never expect anyone to care. Well, I care, and I'm not going to apologize for it. Tony stood abruptly, needing to move, needing space to think. She walked to the windows, putting distance between them, and looked out at the city below. From this height, everything looked small, manageable. The diner was somewhere down there, invisible among the buildings. Her apartment, her life, her struggles, all of it reduced to geometric shapes and ant-sized cars. Why me? She asked quietly. You could protect anyone, why choose me? The silence stretched long enough that Tony thought he might not answer. Then she heard him move closer, felt him stop just behind her, close enough that she could feel the heat of his presence without touching. Because when you looked at me in that diner, you weren't afraid. Everyone else sees the suit, the reputation, the men who follow me. They see danger. But you saw another person working the graveyard shift in their own way. You refilled my coffee like I was human. Tony turned to face him, and the vulnerability in his expression caught her off guard. This man who'd terrified grown men this morning, who commanded rooms with his presence, who seemed capable of rewriting reality with a phone call. He looked at her like she held something he couldn't buy or intimidate into submission. I can't afford this, Tony whispered, and she wasn't talking about money. Whatever this is, whatever you want from me, I can't afford it. I'm not asking for payment. Sangwook reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and gently tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. His fingers were warm, careful. I'm offering protection, genuine protection. The Sterlings want to destroy you. Let them try. They'll find me in their way. And when this is over, when they've been dealt with and I'm no longer interesting. Something flickered across his face, hurt maybe, or frustration. You think this is temporary, that I invest 6 months in someone I plan to abandon? He shook his head. I don't do anything halfway, Tony. When I commit to something, I see it through. When I protect someone, they stay protected. Why should I believe you? Because I'm still here. He said it simply, like it explained everything. I could have intervened at the diner and walked away, could have sent my men to deal with Sterling's fixers without showing up myself. But I'm here, standing in my home with you, showing you pieces of my life I show almost no one because I want you to understand that this isn't a transaction. It's a choice. My choice. Tony's phone buzzed in her pocket, a text from Destiny asking if she was okay, if she'd seen the news. The news. Tony's stomach dropped. What news? Sangwook pulled out his own phone, tapped a few times, then showed her. The local news website had a headline, Sterling Development under investigation for fraud. Below it, a smaller story, Real estate tycoon's daughter caught on video assaulting service worker. How? I have people everywhere, Sangwook said quietly. The moment those fixers threatened you, I made calls. The unedited diner footage went to 3 news outlets. The Sterling's financial records, the real ones, went to the district attorney. By noon, Richard Sterling will be too busy protecting himself to worry about you. Tony stared at the phone, at the headlines, at the systematic dismantling of the empire that had tried to crush her. You did all this since this morning. I did all this the moment Chloe Sterling spit in your face. He tucked the phone away. I was just waiting for them to make the next move so I could respond proportionally. They gave me that when they sent those men after you." The magnitude of it settled over Tony like a weight. This man had declared war on one of the most powerful families in the city. For her, because she'd been humiliated in a diner, because someone had hurt her. "I don't know what to say." "Say you'll stay here today. Rest. Let me handle the Sterling situation. Tomorrow we'll figure out what comes next." Tony looked around the penthouse again, at the impossible luxury, at the life she'd never dreamed of accessing. Then she looked at Sangwook, at the man who'd somehow decided she was worth protecting, worth fighting for. "Just today," she said finally. He smiled then, just a slight curve of his lips, but it transformed his face. "Just today," he agreed. But they both knew it was a lie. Tony woke to the sound of her phone exploding with notifications. Not buzzing, exploding. A constant stream of chimes and vibrations that dragged her from the first real sleep she'd had in weeks. For a moment, she couldn't remember where she was. The sheets were too soft, the mattress too comfortable, the light filtering through the windows too clean and golden. Then it came back, the penthouse, Sangwook's guest room, the promise that she'd stay just one day. She grabbed her phone from the nightstand and watched as notification after notification flooded the screen. Text messages from numbers she didn't recognize. Missed calls from Destiny, 17 of them. Voicemails piling up faster than she could count. And social media notifications scrolling so rapidly they blurred into a digital scream. Her hands shook as she opened the first message. It was from a coworker at the hotel, someone she barely knew. "Is this you? WTF did you do?" Attached was a link. Tony's thumb hovered over it for a moment before she clicked. The video started playing immediately, and her stomach dropped straight through the floor. It was the diner, but not the diner she remembered. This version had been cut, spliced, rearranged into something unrecognizable. It opened with Chloe on her knees, tears streaming down her face, while Sangwook loomed over her like a monster from a nightmare. The angle made him look massive, threatening, his hand raised as if he was about to strike. Chloe's voice, amplified, distorted, pleaded for mercy. "Please, I didn't mean anything. Don't hurt me, please." Then it cut to Tony, but not the Tony who'd been humiliated, who'd had spit sliding down her face. This Tony looked cold, calculating. The editor had captured a moment when she'd been looking at Chloe, probably in shock, and frozen it, zoomed in, made it look like cruelty, like satisfaction. A voiceover began, professional and grave. "Last night, 17-year-old Chloe Sterling was violently threatened at a local diner by waitress Tony Green and her associate, identified by sources as son Sangwook, a known organized crime figure. Sterling, who had stopped at the diner with friends after a charity event, was forced to her knees and verbally assaulted in what witnesses describe as an attempted extortion scheme. The video cut to witness interviews customers from the diner, faces blurred, voices distorted. But Tony recognized them. The drunk at the counter, the college student who'd never looked up from his laptop. None of them had helped her, and now they were lying. "She was aggressive from the start," one distorted voice claimed. "Refused to serve them, got confrontational. Then that man showed up and it got scary. He was threatening everyone. Said he'd hurt anyone who talked." Another voice. "The girl was terrified. Crying, begging, it was awful to watch. That waitress just stood there smiling." The video ended with a still frame of Tony's face. That same frozen moment of shock transformed into malice and text overlay. "Tony Green, violent extortionist or Mafia accomplice." Tony's vision blurred. She watched it again, and again. Each time it got worse. The editing was masterful, professional, designed to transform victim into villain with surgical precision. Every cut, every angle, every witness statement built a narrative that was completely false but entirely believable. She switched to social media and immediately wished she hadn't. The video had gone viral, millions of views in just a few hours. The comments were a tsunami of hatred. People like her are why I never tip. Of course she's working with the Mafia. Look at her. Criminal written all over her. That poor girl. Hope they both get locked up for life. Why do these people think they can treat customers like that? Stay in your lane. There were think pieces already being written. The hidden violence of service workers. When entitlement turns dangerous. The Mafia's new recruitment strategy. Desperate women. Her full name was everywhere. Her age. Where she worked. Both jobs. Someone had found her mother's care facility and posted about how Tony was probably stealing from dementia patients. Another thread was dissecting Destiny's social media, suggesting her scholarship applications were funded by mob money. They were destroying her, systematically, efficiently, publicly. A knock at the bedroom door made her jump. "Tony," Sangwook's voice, careful and controlled. "May I come in?" She couldn't answer. Her throat had closed completely. But he must have heard something, a sob, maybe, or the sound of her phone hitting the floor, because the door opened slowly. Sangwook stepped inside, and his expression transformed when he saw her. "You watched it." "The whole city watched it." Tony's voice came out broken, raw. "They think I'm a criminal. They think I'm extorting teenagers. They're going after my sister, my mother." The words dissolved into tears she'd been holding back since the diner, since the milkshake, since her entire life had been ripped apart and reassembled into a lie. Sangwook crossed the room and sat on the edge of the bed, close but not touching. "I know. I've been monitoring it since it dropped 3 hours ago." 3 hours, Tony's head snapped up. "Why didn't you wake me?" "Because you needed sleep more than you needed to watch yourself being destroyed in real time." He reached for her phone, picked it up from where it had fallen. "And because I was already working on the response." "What response? They have the narrative, they control it. No one's going to believe the truth now." "They will." His voice held absolute certainty. "The Sterlings made a mistake. They went too big, too fast. They turned this into a national story, which means more scrutiny, more eyes, more journalists looking for the real story behind the headline. And when that happens, the truth has a way of surfacing." Tony wanted to believe him, but she'd seen the comments, seen the hatred, seen how quickly the internet had decided she was guilty. "My life is over. Even if you clear my name, even if you prove it's all lies, I'm still that girl from the video. That's all people will remember." "Then we make them remember something else." Sangwook finally reached out, his hand gentle on her shoulder. "Tony, I need you to trust me. Can you do that?" Before she could answer, his phone rang. He glanced at the screen and his expression hardened. "I need to take this. Don't look at social media again, please." He stepped out of the room, and Tony heard his voice drop to a murmur as he spoke to whoever was on the other end. She sat on the impossibly soft bed in the impossibly beautiful room and felt the weight of the world's judgment pressing down on her chest. Her phone buzzed again. Another text from a number she didn't know. "You should kill yourself before someone does it for you." Then another, "I know where you live. You're dead." And another, "Hope the Mafia money was worth it when you're getting raped in prison." The messages kept coming, an avalanche of anonymous hatred from people who'd never met her, never spoken to her, never bothered to question the narrative they'd been fed. She was a villain now, a cautionary tale, a symbol of everything wrong with people who didn't know their place. The bedroom door opened again, and this time Sangwook wasn't alone. One of his men, she recognized him from the diner, a lean man with cold eyes carried in a laptop. Sangwook set it on the bed and opened it to a news site. "It's starting," he said simply. The headline read, "Questions emerge about Sterling extortion video." Below it, an article from a respected investigative journalist who'd apparently received a tip about editing inconsistencies. The piece laid out, point by point, how the video had been manipulated. It included timestamps, metadata analysis, expert commentary from forensic video specialists. "How did you?" "I have resources." Sangwook scrolled down to show her more articles popping up in real time. This journalist has been investigating the Sterlings for months. I gave him the unedited footage from the diner along with documentation of their editing process. He's not the only one. 3 other outlets are working on similar pieces. But the comments on this article were skeptical. Of course, the mob is trying to cover their tracks. Fake news defending criminals. The journalist probably got paid off. They don't believe it, Tony said flatly. Not yet, but they will. He pulled up another tab, this one showing a press conference scheduled for 2:00 p.m. Richard Sterling is being forced to answer questions about his company's financial practices. The district attorney received an anonymous tip, along with extensive documentation about fraud, money laundering, and bribery. By tonight, Sterling Development will be the story, not you. But I'm still the girl from the video. You're still the victim. Sangwook's voice went hard, and I'm going to make sure everyone knows it. The Sterlings are using edited footage and fake witness testimony to destroy an innocent woman's life. They're counting on you to believe their lies, to move on to the next story without questioning the narrative. But the truth matters. Justice matters. Don't let the liars win. Subscribe now to ensure the truth is always heard, because Tony Green deserves better than a system that protects the powerful and crushes the vulnerable. Tony's phone buzzed again, but this time it was Destiny. She answered immediately. Tony, her sister's voice was small, scared. Everyone at school is talking about it. They're saying terrible things. The principal pulled me out of class to ask if I was safe at home, if you were involved with criminals. Destiny, listen to me. None of it is true. I promise you, none of it is true. I know that. Her sister's voice strengthened. I know you wouldn't do those things, but no one believes me. They're all looking at me like I'm dangerous, like I'm going to. Her voice broke. What are we going to do? Tony looked at Sangwook, at the man who'd somehow become her unlikely protector. We're going to fight back, and we're going to win. She didn't know if she believed it, but she needed Destiny to believe it, needed her sister to survive this tsunami of hatred that Tony had somehow brought crashing down on both of them. After she hung up, Sangwook showed her another article, and another. The narrative was slowly, painfully beginning to shift. Journalists were questioning the timeline. Lawyers were pointing out legal inconsistencies in the Sterlings' claims. A few brave souls on social media were asking why a 17-year-old at a charity event was demanding alcohol at 2:00 a.m. But it wasn't enough. Not nearly enough. The damage was done. Tony's face was synonymous with violence and extortion in millions of minds. Her name was a punchline. Her life was a cautionary tale. How long? She asked quietly. How long until this is over? Sangwook closed the laptop and looked at her with something that might have been admiration. As long as it takes. But Tony, you're still standing. That's more than most people would be after what you've been through. And that terrifies them more than any video ever could. Outside the penthouse windows, the city continued its indifferent rotation. Somewhere down there, people were sharing the edited video, adding their own hatred to the pile, convinced they were on the side of justice. And somewhere in a mansion Tony had never seen, Richard Sterling was realizing that son Sangwook didn't make idle threats. The war had begun, and Tony was standing at the center of it, whether she wanted to be or not. By evening, Tony couldn't take it anymore. The penthouse felt like a gilded cage, beautiful, comfortable, suffocating. She'd spent the day watching the narrative war unfold on screens, watching Sangwook make calls in his study with the door half closed, watching the city lights flicker on as the sun set over a world that had decided she was guilty. Destiny had called twice more, each time sounding smaller, more fragile. Her mother's care facility had contacted her about concerns regarding the source of payment. The hotel had fired her via email. Professional liability, they'd said, as if her presence might contaminate the sheets she cleaned. Even Roy had sent an awkward text saying he couldn't have her back at the diner, not with the attention, not with the protesters who'd apparently shown up demanding the place be shut down for harboring criminals. Everything was gone. Her jobs, her reputation, her safety. And she was sitting in a stranger's penthouse wearing borrowed clothes, eating food she hadn't paid for, accepting protection she'd never asked for from a man whose world was so far removed from hers they might as well be different species. She found her own clothes, cleaned and folded by someone she'd never met, and changed quickly. Her phone had 17% battery left, enough to get home if she called a rideshare. She could sneak out, disappear back into her own life, deal with the wreckage on her own terms. Tony was halfway to the private elevator when Sang-wook's voice stopped her cold. "Where are you going?" She turned slowly. He stood in the doorway of his study, jacket discarded, shirt sleeves rolled up, looking at her with an expression that made her stomach tighten. Not angry, something more dangerous than anger. Possessive. "Home, I can't stay here anymore." "Yes, you can." He moved toward her with that predatory grace, each step deliberate. "You will." "You don't get to tell me what to do." Tony's voice shook, but she held her ground. "I appreciate everything you've done, I really do, but this isn't my world. I don't belong here. I need to go back to my life and figure out how to survive this on my own." "Your life?" Sang-wook's laugh was bitter, sharp. "What life, Tony? The diner fired you. The hotel fired you. There are death threats being posted with your address attached. Someone threw a brick through your apartment window 3 hours ago. Yes, I know, because I have people watching the building. You think you can just walk back into that and figure it out?" "It's my mess to figure out." "It stopped being just your mess the moment I got involved." He was close now, close enough that she could see the tension in his jaw, the way his hands clenched and unclenched at his sides. "You think I did all of this? Exposed the Sterlings, mobilized journalists, put myself in the crosshairs of a wealthy family with political connections, just so you could walk away." "I didn't ask you to do any of that." "You didn't have to." The words came out rough, almost angry. "The moment Chloe Sterling spit in your face, you became mine to protect, mine to defend, mine." The possessiveness in that last word hit Tony like a physical force. She took a step back, her shoulders hitting the wall beside the elevator. "I'm not yours. I'm not anyone's. I'm just trying to survive." "And you think you can survive this alone?" Sang-wook braced his hands on either side of her head, caging her in without touching her. "You think the world is going to suddenly decide to be fair, that the Sterlings will just give up and leave you alone? They're losing everything, Tony. Their company, their reputation, their power, and they blame you for it. Then let me disappear. I'll change my name, move to another city." "They'll find you." His voice dropped lower, and Tony felt it in her bones. "And when they do, I won't be there to stop what happens next. Is that what you want? To be alone when they come for you?" "I've always been alone." The words came out before she could stop them, raw and true. "My whole life, I've handled everything by myself. My mom's illness, Destiny's school, keeping us fed and housed and safe. I've done it all alone because that's how it works for people like me. We don't get protection. We don't get someone swooping in to save us. We survive or we don't, and that's just how it is." Something in Sang-wook's expression cracked. The possessive intensity softened into something that looked almost like pain. "I know what it's like, being alone, believing you have to carry everything yourself because no one else will." Tony couldn't help the skepticism in her voice. "You have men who follow your orders, money that solves problems, power that makes the Sterlings tremble. You have no idea what it's like to be actually alone." "Don't I?" He pushed away from the wall, turning to face the windows, his silhouette dark against the city lights. "I was 12 when my father was killed, stabbed 17 times in an alley by a rival gang member. My mother couldn't handle it, the grief, the fear, the debt he'd left behind. She killed herself 6 months later, pills and cheap whiskey." Tony's breath caught. This wasn't what she'd expected. "I was put in the system. Foster care, group homes, the kind of places where you learn that weakness gets you killed and trust gets you betrayed." His voice was flat now, reciting facts that had been worn smooth by repetition. By 15, I was running with a crew in Koreatown. By 17, I'd killed my first man, someone who'd tried to rape a girl who reminded me of my mother. By 20, I'd taken over the operation because everyone above me was either dead or in prison. He turned back to face her, and Tony saw something in his eyes she'd never seen before. Vulnerability. Real, raw vulnerability. I built this empire alone. Every connection, every alliance, every piece of power I hold, I fought for it because I had to. Because being alone meant being dead, and I refused to die in some anonymous alley like my father. So yes, Tony, I know what it's like to survive. I know what it's like to carry everything yourself because the alternative is drowning. Tony's anger was dissolving, replaced by something more complicated. Then why me? You could have anyone. You have the power to protect whoever you want. Why choose someone who's just going to drag you into more problems? Sang-wook moved closer again, but this time his approach was different, gentler. Do you remember the first time I came to the diner? 6 months ago, you were dealing with that drunk who'd grabbed you. Your associate. My associate, he confirmed. I watched you handle him, watched you stay calm, professional, even though you were terrified, even though no one was coming to help you. And after he left, after Roy offered you the rest of the night off, you said no. You finished your shift because you needed the money, because Destiny had a field trip payment due. He was right in front of her now, close enough that she could see the flecks of amber in his dark eyes. I watched you refill coffee for customers who didn't tip, smile at people who treated you like furniture, work yourself to exhaustion because that's what survival required. And I saw something I'd lost a long time ago, genuine dignity. Not the kind that comes from power or money, but the kind that exists despite having neither. You were the strongest person in that diner, and no one knew it but me. That's not strength, that's just desperation. It's both. His hand lifted slowly, telegraphing the movement, giving her time to pull away. When she didn't, he cupped her face with a gentleness that seemed impossible from someone capable of such violence. I chose you because you reminded me of who I was before the world taught me to be hard. And because when you looked at me, you didn't see a monster or a weapon or a means to an end. You saw a man who needed coffee. Tony's eyes burned with tears she refused to shed. This isn't fair. You can't just decide I'm yours without asking what I want. You're right. He dropped his hand but didn't step back. So I'm asking, what do you want, Tony? The question hung between them, heavy with implications. What did she want? To go back to a life that no longer existed? To pretend she could survive this alone when every piece of evidence suggested otherwise? Or to accept that something had fundamentally changed the moment Sun Sang-wook had stood up in that diner? I want my sister to be safe, she said finally. I want my mother to stay in her care facility. I want to not be afraid every time I open my phone or walk down the street. Her voice broke. I want to stop feeling like I'm drowning. Then stay. The words were quiet but absolute. Stay here where I can protect you. Let me handle the Sterlings, the media, the threats. Let me give you what you've never had, someone in your corner who has the power to actually help. And what do you get out of this? What's the price? Sang-wook's smile was sad, knowing. You think there has to be a transaction, that I can't just want to protect you because you deserve protection. Nothing's free, not in my world. Then maybe it's time you lived in a different world. He stepped back, giving her space, and Tony felt the loss of his proximity like a physical ache. I'm not asking you to love me. I'm not even asking you to trust me completely. I'm asking you to let me stand between you and the people who want to destroy you. That's it. That's not it. You said I was yours. That's not just protection, that's ownership. You're right, I apologize. He ran a hand through his hair, a rare gesture of frustration. I spent 15 years learning that the only way to keep something safe is to control it completely. It's a hard habit to break, but I'm trying, Tony. For you, I'm trying. The sincerity in his voice undid something in her chest. This man who commanded empires and dismantled families with a phone call was standing in his penthouse looking at her like she held something he couldn't take by force. "I need boundaries," Tony said quietly. "If I stay, I need to know I can leave when this is over, that you're not going to lock me in some golden cage and pretend it's for my own good." Agreed. And Destiny stays in school. Normal, normal life. I don't want her involved in your world. Already arranged. She'll have security, but discreet. She won't even know they're there. And my mother will continue receiving the best care available. I've already upgraded her facility and covered the next year of payments. Consider it a gift, not a transaction. Tony stared at him, overwhelmed by the casual way he just solved problems that had been suffocating her for years. "I can't accept that. I can't owe you." "You don't owe me anything." Sangwook moved to his desk, pulled out a folder, and handed it to her. "The payments were made by an anonymous donor. Legally, they can't be traced back to me or you. Your mother's care is secure regardless of what happens between us." She opened the folder and saw the documentation, payment confirmations, upgraded care plans, everything official and ironclad. He'd done this before asking for anything in return, before she'd agreed to stay. "Why?" The question came out as a whisper. "Because you shouldn't have to choose between your safety and your mother's care. Because the system that makes you choose is broken, and I'm tired of watching it break people like you." He moved closer again, and this time when he cupped her face, she leaned into the touch. "Stay, Tony. Not because you're mine, because I'm yours. Use me. Use my power, my resources, my protection. Take everything I have and burn the Sterlings to the ground with it." The offer was intoxicating, dangerous, everything she'd never allowed herself to want. Someone strong enough to carry some of the weight. Someone willing to fight battles she'd always fought alone. "Just until this is over," she said, knowing it was a lie even as she spoke it. "Just until it's over," Sangwook agreed, and the small smile that curved his lips said he knew it was a lie too. Tony stepped away from the elevator and back into the penthouse, back into his world. And if somewhere deep inside she knew she'd just made a choice she could never unmake, she pushed that knowledge down and focused on the immediate relief of not having to face the darkness alone anymore. The press conference was scheduled for 10:00 a.m. on a Tuesday, exactly 1 week after the edited video had destroyed Tony's life. Sangwook had spent that week methodically building his case, assembling documentation that read like a crime novel, financial records showing illegal land seizures, witness testimonies from families the Sterlings had displaced, photographs of code violations swept under expensive rugs, and communication logs proving systematic bribery of city officials. Tony stood in front of the bathroom mirror in the penthouse, staring at a version of herself she barely recognized. The stylist Sangwook had hired, despite Tony's protests, had transformed her from invisible waitress to someone who looked like she belonged on camera. Her hair was styled but natural, her makeup subtle but polished. She wore a simple navy dress that somehow cost more than 3 months of her old rent, paired with shoes that didn't hurt her feet for the first time in her adult life. "You look terrified," Sangwook said from the doorway. He was in a black suit that probably cost more than a used car, looking every inch the dangerous man he was, except for his eyes. When he looked at her, something in his expression softened. "I am terrified." Tony turned to face him, her hands twisting together. "What if no one believes us? What if this makes it worse?" "It won't." He crossed the bathroom and took her hands, stilling their anxious movement. "We have documentation they can't dispute. We have witnesses they can't silence. And we have you, genuine, honest, sympathetic. The Sterlings thought they could bury you under lies because you were nobody. But that's exactly why people will believe you. You have nothing to gain from this except your life back. And you have everything to lose." Tony searched his face, looking for doubt, for regret. "If this goes wrong, you're exposed. Your business, your operations, everything you've built could come crashing down." "Then I'll build something else." He said it like it was simple, like empires were replaceable. With you. The possessiveness in those last two words should have frightened her. A week ago, it would have. But 7 days of watching him work, seeing how he protected not just her but Destiny and her mother, witnessing the careful way he navigated her boundaries while simultaneously demolishing anyone who threatened her, it had shifted something fundamental in her understanding of what safety could look like. "We should go," she said quietly, "before I lose my nerve." The press conference was being held at a neutral location, a hotel conference room downtown that Sangwook had rented under a shell company. The alternative would have been holding it at his offices, but that would have fed the narrative that this was a Mafia publicity stunt rather than a legitimate revelation of criminal activity. When they arrived, the room was already packed. Journalists from major outlets, local news cameras, bloggers with recording equipment, and what looked like half the city's legal community. Tony recognized the district attorney in the front row, his expression carefully neutral. Behind him sat several people she didn't know but Sangwook later identified as federal investigators who'd been waiting for exactly this kind of break in their Sterling case. At the back of the room, partially hidden behind a camera crew, Tony spotted Richard Sterling himself. He looked older than his billboard suggested, with deep lines around his mouth and eyes that held something between fury and fear. Beside him sat his lawyer, a woman in an aggressive red suit who was already typing furiously on her phone. Chloe wasn't there. According to the news reports Tony had been monitoring obsessively, she'd been sent to a wellness retreat in Europe the day after the scandal broke, running away with Daddy's money while Tony's face was still being used as a synonym for criminal. Sangwook touched her elbow gently, guiding her toward the podium at the front of the room. Two of his men flanked the stage, their presence a reminder that this wasn't just about words. There was real power backing every claim they were about to make. The room quieted as they took their positions. Sangwook stood slightly behind and to the left of the microphone, a position that suggested support rather than control. This was Tony's moment. He'd orchestrated it, funded it, protected her enough to make it possible, but the words needed to come from her. Tony's hands shook as she gripped the edges of the podium. She looked out at the sea of faces, at the cameras with their red recording lights, at Richard Sterling's barely contained rage. Then she thought of Destiny sitting in school right now, trying to ignore the whispers. She thought of her mother in the care facility, confused and vulnerable. She thought of every shift she'd worked where someone had treated her like she was less than human. She cleared her throat and began. "My name is Tony Green. A week ago, I was a waitress at Neon Nights Diner. I worked 60-hour weeks across 2 jobs to support my 16-year-old sister and pay for my mother's Alzheimer's care. I kept my head down. I followed the rules. I was invisible by necessity and by choice." Her voice steadied as she spoke, the words she'd practiced with Sangwook flowing more naturally than she'd expected. On the night of January 23rd, Chloe Sterling and 4 of her friends came into the diner where I worked. She was 17 years old and demanded that I serve her alcohol. When I refused, because serving alcohol to minors is illegal and would have cost me my job, she became verbally abusive. She called me names. She mocked my uniform, my life, my circumstances. And when I tried to walk away, she threw a milkshake at me and spit in my face while her friends recorded it for social media. A murmur rippled through the room. Cameras flashed. Sterling's lawyer was standing now, trying to object, but the moderator, a retired judge Sangwook had hired, gestured for her to sit. What you saw in the viral video was not the complete story. It was carefully edited footage designed to transform a victim into a villain. The man who intervened that night, Sun Sangwook, did so because no one else would. He asked Chloe Sterling to apologize for assaulting me. That's all. No threats, no violence, no extortion. Tony paused, gathering her courage for the next part. But this press conference isn't just about clearing my name. It's about revealing why the Sterlings were so desperate to discredit me that they were willing to fabricate a criminal case. Sangwook moved forward then, placing a thick folder on the podium. Tony opened it, her hands steadier now, and pulled out the first document. This is a record of Sterling Development's land acquisition in the Riverside District. Between 2022 and 2024, Richard Sterling used fraudulent eminent domain claims to seize 12 properties from low-income families. These families were paid a fraction of market value and given 30 days to vacate homes they'd lived in for generations. She held up photographs, families standing in front of houses they'd lost, elderly residents being removed by police, children crying as their belongings were loaded into trucks. This is the Hernandez family, the Lopez family, the Washington family, all displaced so Richard Sterling could build luxury condos that sit half-empty because they're priced beyond what anyone in the community can afford. More murmurs, louder now. Journalists were scribbling notes. Cameras zoomed in on the photographs. Richard Sterling had gone pale, his lawyer whispering urgently in his ear. Tony pulled out more documents. This is evidence of systematic bribery. Building Inspector Thomas Whitmore received over $200,000 in campaign contributions from Sterling Development between 2021 and 2024. During that time, he signed off on 46 properties with documented safety violations, faulty wiring, insufficient fire escapes, toxic mold. She held up photos of the violations, exposed wiring that could kill someone, fire escapes that ended in midair, black mold creeping up walls where children slept. 3 people have died in Sterling properties due to these violations. 3 people whose deaths were ruled accidental because the inspector said the buildings were safe. The room erupted. Reporters were shouting questions. Sterling's lawyer was on her feet again, yelling about slander and defamation. But Tony kept going, her voice rising above the chaos. The Sterlings didn't come after me because I was actually dangerous. They came after me because I was convenient. I was poor. I was black. I was a service worker. The kind of person the system is designed to not believe. They thought they could bury me under their lies because people like me get buried every day and no one notices. She looked directly at Richard Sterling, meeting his eyes across the crowded room. But they made a mistake. They went after someone who had nothing left to lose and someone powerful enough to fight back. And now the whole world gets to see what they've been hiding. Sangwook stepped forward then, taking the microphone with the same controlled authority he brought to everything. Everything you've seen today, every document, every photograph, every financial record, has been submitted to the district attorney's office, the FBI, and the state attorney general. We have witness testimony from former Sterling employees willing to testify about fraudulent practices. We have communication logs showing coordination between Richard Sterling and city officials. We have enough evidence to bury Sterling Development in criminal charges for the next decade. He paused, letting that sink in, then continued. But this isn't just about one corrupt developer. It's about a system that protects people like Richard Sterling while destroying people like Tony Green. It's about a media environment that accepts edited footage as truth without question. It's about how easily we allow the powerful to weaponize our assumptions about who deserves dignity and who doesn't. The questions came in a flood after that. Reporters shouting over each other, cameras flashing like strobes, the noise level rising to something almost physical. But Tony barely heard it. She was watching Richard Sterling, watching the moment he realized his empire was crumbling in real time. He stood abruptly, his lawyer trying to hold him back, but he shook her off and pointed at Tony with a shaking hand. This is a setup. She's a criminal working with organized crime to... To what? Sangwook's voice cut through the noise like a blade. To expose your crimes with your own documentation. The files we've released came from your servers, Mr. Sterling, your company's internal communications, your personal bank accounts. If this is a setup, you did it to yourself. Sterling's face went from pale to red, his voice rising to a shout. "You're a criminal. Everyone knows what you are. You think anyone will believe." "They already do." Sangwook gestured to the room, to the journalists furiously typing, to the cameras broadcasting this confrontation live. "The documents speak for themselves. Your denials are just noise." Security was moving toward Sterling now, his lawyer pulling him toward the exit. But before he left, he turned back to Tony with such hatred in his eyes that she felt it like a physical touch. "This isn't over," he snarled. "You think you've won? You've destroyed my family, my company. You'll pay for this. Both of you will pay." "I think you'll find I'm rather difficult to make pay for anything," Sangwook said mildly. Then, to the security team, "Escort Mr. Sterling out, please, and notify his legal counsel that any threats against Miss Green will be added to the growing list of charges." As Sterling was led away, still shouting, the room erupted again. This time with questions directed at Tony, at Sangwook, at the implications of everything they'd just revealed. The press conference ran another 40 minutes, long enough for every major outlet to get their footage, long enough for the story to go viral in real time. When it was finally over, when the last journalist had been ushered out and the room was empty except for Sangwook's security team, Tony felt her legs give out. She caught herself on the podium, her whole body shaking with adrenaline crash. Sangwook was there immediately, his arm around her waist, supporting her weight. "You did it! You were perfect!" "I just ended a man's entire legacy." Her voice sounded distant, disconnected. "His family, his company." "He ended it himself." Sangwook turned her to face him, his hands gentle on her shoulders. "You just refuse to be buried with it. There's a difference." Richard Sterling used his wealth and power to crush anyone who got in his way. He displaced families, endangered tenants, and when one waitress refused to be silent about his daughter's cruelty, he tried to destroy her life completely. But Tony Green stood up. She fought back. She refused to let the powerful win just because they'd always won before. Comment, "Everyone deserves respect," below if you would have stood by Tony's side, because that's what real justice looks like, protecting the vulnerable, no matter the cost. Tony's phone was already exploding with notifications, but this time they were different. Messages of support, apologies from people who'd believed the edited video, journalists requesting interviews, organizations offering legal assistance if she needed it. The narrative had shifted, finally, fundamentally shifted. "What happens now?" she asked. Sangwook smiled, and there was something almost predatory in it. "Now, the Sterlings face consequences, real ones, and you get your life back or build a new one, whatever you choose." As they left the hotel, walking past cameras and reporters still clamoring for statements, Tony realized something had changed. She wasn't invisible anymore. For better or worse, she'd become visible. And with Sun Sangwook at her side, she was learning that visibility didn't have to mean vulnerability. It could mean power. The arrests happened faster than even Sangwook had predicted. 72 hours after the press conference, federal agents executed simultaneous raids on Sterling Development Headquarters, Richard Sterling's mansion in the hills, and 3 offshore accounts that had been meticulously hidden behind shell corporations. The images were everywhere. Richard Sterling in handcuffs being led from his office, his lawyer shouting about constitutional violations, his wife collapsing on the marble steps of their home, while cameras captured every moment of her perfectly performed devastation. Chloe was brought back from Europe on a private jet, not by her family but by federal marshals. She faced multiple charges, filing a false police report, conspiracy to commit fraud, destruction of evidence. The spoiled teenager who'd spit in Tony's face now sat in the same county jail where she'd tried to send Tony, learning what it meant to be powerless in a system designed to crush you. The building inspector took a plea deal and testified against Sterling, detailing years of bribes and deliberately ignored violations. 3 city council members resigned before they could be indicted. 2 police officers who'd been on Sterling's payroll were suspended pending investigation. The entire structure of corruption that had allowed the Sterlings to operate with impunity was collapsing. And every news cycle brought fresh revelations. Tony watched it all from the penthouse, still unable to fully process that she'd been the catalyst for this systematic dismantling. Sangwook had been right. Once the first domino fell, the rest followed with devastating efficiency. The system that had protected the Sterlings for decades turned on them the moment their power wavered, and now everyone wanted to be the one who'd always known they were corrupt, who'd always suspected, who'd always planned to do something about it. "They're offering you a book deal," Sangwook said one morning, scrolling through his tablet over coffee. "3 publishers so far, and there's interest from a production company about a limited series." Tony looked up from her own phone, where she'd been reading messages from former coworkers at the diner, apologies mostly, awkward attempts to reconnect now that she was vindicated. That's surreal. That's justice in America. Suffering gets monetized, trauma becomes content. He set down the tablet and studied her face. "But it's your story. If you want to tell it, you should, on your terms." "I don't know if I want to relive it." Tony pulled Sangwook's borrowed robe tighter around herself. She'd been living in his clothes more than her own lately, finding comfort in fabric that smelled like cedar and smoke. "Part of me just wants to disappear again, go back to being invisible." "You can't, not anymore." Sangwook's voice was gentle but honest. "You're the face of every person who's been stepped on by people like the Sterlings. Whether you wanted that responsibility or not, you have it now. The question is what you do with it." Before Tony could respond, her phone rang. Roy's name flashed on the screen, and her stomach tightened. She hadn't spoken to him since the firing email, since the cowardly way he'd cut her loose to save himself. She answered anyway. "Hello." "Tony," Roy's voice was rough, older than she remembered. "I need to talk to you, in person, at the diner if you're willing, please." Something in his tone made her agree before she'd consciously decided to. 20 minutes later, she was dressed in jeans and a sweater that actually fit her properly, courtesy of the shopping trip Sangwook had insisted on, and heading toward the car with him at her side. "You don't have to do this," he said as his driver navigated toward the old neighborhood. "You don't owe Roy anything. He fired you when you needed support." "I know, but I need to see it. The diner. That place was my life for 3 years. I need to say goodbye to it properly, even if Roy's an asshole." The drive took 30 minutes, carrying them back down through the city's stratified layers until they reached the neighborhood where Tony had spent most of her adult life. It looked different somehow, smaller, grayer, more worn than she remembered. Or maybe she was different, and the neighborhood was exactly the same. Neon Night's diner sat on its corner like it always had, the flickering sign still promising "open all night" in pink and blue letters. But something was wrong. The parking lot was empty except for Roy's beat-up truck. The windows were dark. A "closed until further notice" sign hung on the door. Tony's chest tightened. What happened? "The protests," Sangwook said quietly, his hand finding hers. "After the edited video went viral, people came here, some to support you, more to condemn you. It got violent. Roy had to close for safety." Roy was waiting inside, and he looked like he'd aged a decade in the 2 weeks since Tony had last seen him. His hair was grayer, his face more lined, his shoulders curved inward like he was trying to make himself smaller. The diner was dark except for the emergency lights, casting everything in a sickly yellow glow. "Tony," he stood when they entered, his hands twisting a dish towel, the same nervous gesture she'd seen 1,000 times. "Thank you for coming and, Mr. Sun." He swallowed hard, clearly terrified. "Thank you for allowing this." "Tony makes her own decisions," Sangwook said, but he positioned himself between Roy and Tony, a subtle reminder of who held the power now. Roy nodded quickly. "Right, of course." He looked at Tony, and his eyes were red-rimmed. I need to apologize. I should have stood by you, should have fought for you. Instead, I fired you over email like a coward because I was scared of losing the diner, and I lost it anyway. Tony looked around at the empty booths, the counter where she'd refilled coffee 1,000,000 times, the kitchen where Roy had taught her to work the griddle when they were short-staffed. You're closing permanently. I can't afford to reopen. The protests scared off customers. The landlord's using the media attention as an excuse to triple my rent, and even if I could afford it. He gestured helplessly at the space. Who wants to eat at the place where the Sterling scandal started? It's cursed now, tainted. Part of Tony felt vindicated. Roy had abandoned her, and now he was facing consequences. But a larger part just felt sad. This place had been her home in its own dysfunctional way. The late nights, the regulars, the rhythm of service that had structured her life for years. I'm sorry, she said and meant it. Don't be, this is what I deserve. Roy's voice cracked. You were a good worker, Tony, better than good. You held this place together half the time, and I repaid you by throwing you to the wolves. I just wanted you to know. I'm sorry, truly sorry. Sangwook's phone buzzed. He glanced at it, then at Tony. We should go. There are reporters outside. Of course there were. Tony's return to the diner would be news. Everything about her life was news now. She started to turn toward the door, but something made her stop. An idea forming, reckless and strange and somehow exactly right. How much? She asked Roy. He blinked, confused. What? How much to buy the diner? The business, the equipment, everything. How much? Roy's mouth opened and closed. Tony, you can't, it's not. How much? She looked at Sangwook, who was watching her with an expression that might have been pride. You said I should decide what to do with this. That it's my story to tell. This is how I want to tell it. Sangwook smiled, a real smile, not the dangerous one he showed the world. Make the offer. The negotiation took less than 10 minutes. Roy was desperate, and Sangwook had the kind of money that made negotiations simple. By the time they left the diner, Tony owned it, the business, the building, everything. It was insane. It was impulsive. It was perfect. The reporters swarmed them the moment they stepped outside, cameras flashing, voices shouting questions over each other. But Sangwook's security team created a corridor, and he guided Tony through it with a hand on her lower back. Miss Green, what does it mean that you're buying the diner? Are you planning to reopen? Is this revenge against Roy for firing you? Mr. Sun, is this purchase connected to your organization's business interests? Tony stopped at the car door and turned back to face them. Sangwook tensed slightly beside her, protective, but he didn't stop her. This was her choice. I'm buying Neon Night's diner because it represents something important, she said, her voice carrying across the parking lot. It represents every person who's worked a thankless job for minimum wage while the world treated them like they were invisible. Every single mother working doubles to keep her kids fed. Every immigrant trying to build something better. Every person the system is designed to break. The cameras were rolling, every word being broadcast live. Tony took a breath and continued. This diner is going to reopen, but it's going to be different. Fair wages, full benefits, profit sharing. A place where workers are treated with dignity because dignity shouldn't be a luxury reserved for people who can afford it. And it's going to be named after someone who understood that better than anyone. She looked at Sangwook, whose expression had gone very still, very intense. It's going to be called Linda's Place, after my mother, because she taught me that you survive by helping others survive, and that's a lesson worth building something on. The reporters erupted with follow-up questions, but Sangwook was already guiding her into the car, his hand gentle but firm. The door closed, muffling the noise, and the car pulled away from the chaos. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Then Sangwook reached across the seat and took her hand, threading his fingers through hers. You continue to surprise me, he said quietly. Most people in your position would take the money, leave the city, start over somewhere anonymous, but you're choosing to stay and rebuild. Is that stupid? It's extraordinary. He brought her hand to his lips, kissed her knuckles with surprising tenderness. And I'm going to help you do it. Whatever you need, contractors, lawyers, funding. Linda's Place is going to be everything you described and more. 3 weeks later, they returned to the diner for the soft opening. The space had been transformed, cleaned, updated, brightened without losing its essential character. The checkered floor was repaired and polished. The booths were reupholstered in colors that didn't show every stain. The kitchen had new equipment that actually worked, but the bones of the place remained the same, familiar and comforting. The staff was new, carefully selected people who'd been ground down by the same system that had tried to break Tony. Former homeless individuals given a chance. Ex-convicts who couldn't get hired anywhere else. Single parents who needed flexible schedules. People who understood what it meant to be invisible and who deserved the chance to be seen. When Tony and Sangwook walked in that first night, the entire diner went silent. Every table turned to look, and for a moment Tony felt that old instinct to make herself smaller, to disappear into the background. But she didn't. Instead, she walked to the center of the room, Sangwook at her side, and looked around at the faces watching her, some curious, some skeptical, some openly admiring. "Welcome to Linda's Place," she said, her voice steady, "where everyone gets treated with respect and the coffee's always hot." The room erupted in applause. Cameras flashed. This was still news, would probably be news for months. But underneath the media circus, underneath the story of vindication and transformation, was something simpler. A woman who'd been knocked down had gotten back up and built something better. Sangwook claimed their usual corner booth, his booth, where this had all started, and Tony slid in across from him. A new waitress brought coffee without being asked, and Tony recognized the fear in the woman's eyes, the careful way she handled the cups. That fear of disappointing someone, of losing everything over a single mistake. "You're doing great," Tony told her gently. "And if you need anything, you come find me. That's what I'm here for." The woman's eyes filled with tears, and she nodded quickly before hurrying back to the kitchen. Sangwook watched the exchange with that same intense focus he brought to everything. "You're going to change lives here," he said. "You know that, right? Not just the employees, but everyone who sees what you've built and realizes there's another way." "That's ambitious." Tony picked up her coffee, inhaling the familiar smell. "I'm just trying to run a diner." "You're never just doing anything. You don't know how to be small, even though you spent years trying." He leaned forward, his voice dropping. "That's what I saw in you that first night. That's what made me want to protect you. You were always meant for more than invisibility." Tony met his eyes across the table, seeing the truth in them. This man who'd been a stranger 3 weeks ago was now someone she couldn't imagine her life without. He'd given her protection, power, and the resources to rebuild. But more than that, he'd given her permission to take up space, to be angry, to fight back. "Thank you," she said simply, "for all of it." "Don't thank me. This is all you." He reached across the table, his hand palm up, waiting. "I just made sure you survived long enough to build it." Tony placed her hand in his, feeling the calluses on his palms, the strength in his grip. Outside the diner window, the city continued its endless motion. Cars passing, people walking, life happening with indifferent momentum. But inside Linda's Place, something different was brewing. A small revolution. A proof of concept that dignity didn't have to be earned through suffering. The Sterlings were in prison. The corrupt system they'd represented was slowly being dismantled. And Tony Green, the invisible waitress who'd been spit on and discarded, was building something that would outlast them all. She was no longer the woman the world could ignore. She was the woman who'd fought back and won, and who'd chosen to use that victory to lift others up rather than simply escape. And beside her, holding her hand across a table in a diner that bore her mother's name, was the man who'd seen her when she was invisible and had made sure the whole world would see her too. The story wasn't over, but this chapter, the one about survival and vindication and transformation, was complete, and the next chapter, whatever it held, would be written on her own terms. Finally,